The rain on the muster field was already coming sideways when the selection warden told 400 of us that the sieve did not care who our fathers were and that by the seventh dawn, 3 out of every 4 standing in the mud would be gone. I kept my feet under me. That was the first thing. The wind off the black water behind the field hit hard enough to stagger the candidate beside me, a tall Vaelsa boy with a crest like a folded fan behind his skull, and he caught himself with both arms out and his nostrils flaring, and I just shifted my weight onto the balls of my feet and let the gusts go through me. I had stood on worse footing in worse weather. I had stood on the heaving back of a salvage barge in the North Atlantic with 60 knots of wind trying to take me over the rail, and that had been an ordinary Tuesday. This was just a parade ground with a slope to it and rain that smelled faintly of iron. The warden was Drellhan. They are a heavy species, broad through the shoulders and low to the ground, and their skin is a dull pewter that beads water without wetting, so he stood there dry while 400 candidates went gray and dripping in front of him. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The field carried it. You were not chosen, he said. You were submitted. Each of you is the wager of a house, a fleet, a guild, a debt. The sieve will return most of you to the people who wagered you, and they will know what you are worth by what comes back. That is the only honesty this place offers. Hold to it. Beside me, the Vaelsa boy whispered without moving his head. He says that every cycle. My brother told me. Did your brother pass? I asked. No. Then maybe don't take his notes. He almost laughed. He caught it before it got out, because the warden's flat black eyes were sweeping the line, and a laugh in that first hour was the kind of thing that ended a candidacy before it began. The boy's name, I would learn, was Iseth, and he was here because his house had 3 sons and could afford to lose one to the sieve to find out whether the other 2 were worth keeping. That is the kind of place the selection was. They did not send you to become an officer. They sent you to be measured, and the measuring was the point, and most of the measuring was done by breaking you and watching where the cracks ran. I was here because of a clerical accident and a man named Corin Vale who owed me his life. I will get to him. The short version is that I had pulled Corin Vale's survey crew off a flooding hab on a moon nobody had bothered to name 3 years back when their evacuation tug failed its burn and the only thing in range was a human salvage rig running a contract. I had not done anything heroic. I had done my job, which was to cut a way in through a jammed lock, walk 11 beings out through a corridor that was filling with freezing slush, and hold the last seal long enough for the lifeboat to clear. One of the 11 was a Vaelsa house son with more pull than I understood at the time, and when he got home he did the thing that powerful beings do when they feel a debt they cannot stomach. He made it official. He sponsored me. He put my name into the selection as a candidate of his house. He thought he was paying me an honor. I was 43 years old. I had washed out of my own life twice. Once when the deepwater rigs went automated and the divers got laid off in a single quarter, and once more when I tried to make a go of an independent salvage outfit and learned that the only thing harder than the work was the financing. By the time Corin Vale's gratitude reached me, I was crewing other men's boats for a third of what I'd once made, and the offer arrived like a joke I was too tired to laugh at. Come be measured against the finest young warstock the galaxy could grow, and find out at 43 exactly how far behind the curve a washed-out human diver really is. I almost said no. Then I thought about the alternative, which was another decade of crewing other men's boats, and I thought, the rain there can't be worse than the rain here. The rain here was worse. But I came anyway. The warden finished talking. The field began to move. They split us into sections of 40 and ran us, not toward shelter, which was what every cold instinct in a body wants when the rain is sideways, but down the slope toward the black water, where a line of low concrete bunkers crouched at the tide line with their doors already open and the dark inside already waiting. We ran. I ran in the middle of the pack, not the front, because the front of a pack on day 1 is where the ambitious and the doomed sort themselves out, and I had no interest in being either yet. The candidate ahead of me was Cathani, all height and segmented limbs, and she ran like a thing built for running, which she was. I am built for none of this. I am built for cold water and bad footing and holding still for a long time, and so I held my pace and let the slope do the work, and I reached the bunker line breathing through my nose while half my section were already heaving. Inside, the sieve took us. That is what they called the whole apparatus, the academy, the trials, the grading engine, all of it. The sieve. It was not a building so much as a process you were poured through, and the first thing it did was strip us of every name and rank and housemark we had carried in and stamp us with a number on the back of the left hand, in a gray ink that would not wash off until the sieve decided to release it. Mine was 0117. The boy Iseth was 0118. They did it fast, with a press that hissed against the skin and stung for a breath, and then they pushed us deeper into the dark. The first room was a wall. I want to be precise about this, because the wall mattered later and I did not understand at the time how much. It was a climbing face, maybe 30 meters, set into the back of the bunker and lit from below so the holds threw long shadows up and you could never quite trust what you were reaching for. Wind machines along the floor pushed a hard, gusting draft up the face, the same iron-smelling wet wind from outside, channeled and concentrated. And the wall was wet. They kept it wet on purpose, a thin film running down the rock, so the holds were slick and the chalk you'd want did nothing. Top of the wall is the only door out of this room, a voice said, not the warden. A proctor, a thin Drellin with a band on its arm, standing at a console off to the side. You have until the light turns. You climb or you remain in this room. The sieve does not come back for those who remain. The light overhead was a slow amber. I did not know how long it would burn. Around me the section hit the wall like water finding a slope. The Vyelsa among us, and there were many, because the Vyelsa breed officers the way some worlds breed wheat, went up it like the thing was made for them. They were hollow-boned and light through the chest, 100,000 years of thermal soaring built into their frames, and they did not climb so much as flow, hands and feet finding holds the way water finds the low place. Asath was 3 body lengths up before I had my hands on the rock. He was good. His crest snapped up bright when he made a clean catch, and he made a lot of clean catches. I climbed slow. I want to be clear that I climbed badly by their standard. I am heavy. I am heavy in a way that has weight to it. Real mass that the wall felt every time I committed to a hold, and the slick film meant that every grip was a negotiation and not a guarantee. So I did the only thing 40 years of bad footing had taught me, which was to never ever move a limb until 3 other points of contact were locked and weighted. Slow is smooth, an old diving supervisor used to tell me, and smooth is alive. I went up that wall like I was descending a flooded stairwell in the dark, 1 limb at a time, testing, waiting, committing, and only then reaching. I did not look at the amber light. Looking at the clock is how you start rushing, and rushing on a wet wall is how you come off it. Isith came off it. I heard it before I saw it. A wet scrabble above and to my left, a sound I knew, the sound of a grip that didn't hold and a body that knew, in the half-second of falling, that it had made a mistake. He'd reached for a high hold on a gust, the way you reach when the wind is helping you, and the gust had died at the wrong instant, and his hand had closed on wet rock and slid. He fell maybe 4 meters and caught a ledge with 1 arm. Hard, and I heard the breath go out of him, and then he was hanging there off 1 arm above a 30-meter drop with the wind trying to peel him. Loose. There were proctors below with restraint fields. He would not have died. The sieve does not waste candidates by letting them fall to the floor. The floor was netted in light. But the rule was the wall or the room, and a candidate who fell was a candidate who had failed the wall, and a candidate who failed the wall remained, and the sieve did not come back for those who remained. Isith knew it. I could see him knowing it. He was scrabbling to pull himself back up with 1 arm in a panic that was making his grip worse, and his good arm was shaking, and his crest had gone flat and dark against his skull, which I would later learn is what fear looks like on a Vyelsa. I was 2 meters below him and to the right. I had 3 points locked. The math of it was simple, and it was also against every rule that had just been read to me, because helping another candidate up the wall was, as far as I knew, exactly the kind of thing the sieve would mark me down for. The whole apparatus was built to sort us. You do not help the thing you are being sorted against. I helped him anyway, not because I am noble. I want that on the record. I helped him because I have spent my whole life around the specific sound of a person about to fall, and that sound does something to me that is older than rules. I traversed across to him, slow, 3-point weight, reach, and I got under his hanging body and put my shoulder up into him and took his weight on my back, just enough to kill the swing and let his good arm find purchase, and I said low, the way you talk to a man in the water who is about to drown you both with his thrashing. Stop pulling. Find a foot. There's a seam by your left knee. Put your foot in it and stand. Don't pull. Stand. He found the seam. He stood. The weight came off my back. And then we climbed the rest of it together. Slow, the human and the Vyelsa boy. And behind us the proctor at the console said nothing at all. But I felt its black eyes on me the whole way up, and I knew it had logged something. And I knew it had not been impressed. The amber light turned green as my hand closed on the door at the top. I was not first. I was not in the first 20. But I came through the door, and Isith came through behind me, and on the other side was a corridor with more dark in it, and the dark went down. By the second dawn, we were down to 290. I did not see most of them go. That is how the sieve worked. You came up from a trial, and a section that had been 40 was 31, and nobody told you what had happened to the 9, and you learned fast not to ask, because the ones who asked were the ones who carried the missing around in their heads, and the head was the first thing the sieve went after. I had been a salvage diver. I knew how to put a thing in a box and close the box and open it later on land when there was time, so I boxed the 9 and kept walking. The trials in those first days were physical, and they were stupid in the specific way that physical trials are always stupid. Designed not to find out whether you could do a useful thing, but whether you would keep doing a useless thing past the point where your body told you to stop. We hauled weighted sledges up the slope and down it. We held planks of cold iron over our heads in ranks until arms began to fail down the line like candles going out. We waded into the black water to our chests and stood there while the tide came in and the cold went into the bone. And the proctors watched from the bunker line and logged who flinched. I was not good at any of it the way the Warstock were good at it. The Cathani, the segmented runners, had a reserve of fast twitch strength that let them explode through the sledge hauls in bursts that left me far behind. The Vaelsa could not haul worth anything, too light, too hollow, but they recovered between trials at a rate that seemed almost obscene, fresh again in minutes while I was still leaking heat. There were Threll among us too, squat and armored and tireless, who simply did not seem to register discomfort, and a scattering of other species I had no names for yet, each built by their own world to be better than a human at some piece of this. But the trials were not testing the thing they thought they were testing. I figured that out on the second day, standing chest-deep in the black water with the cold climbing into me and a Threll candidate beside me going rigid and then panicked as the tide reached its neck. The trial was endurance, stand in the cold water until released. Everyone understood it as a test of how much cold a body could take. And by that measure, I should have failed early, because a human body is not built for that water, and I could feel it taking me apart in the ordinary way that cold takes a diver apart from the fingers in. But standing in cold water until released was not in fact a test of cold tolerance. It was a test of whether you could keep your head while your body screamed, whether you could ration your panic, whether you could stand in something that was killing you slowly and not make it kill you faster. And that, the rationing of panic, the standing still inside the thing that is taking you apart, that is the entire trade I had spent my life learning. Every saturation diver learns it or dies. You go down into water cold enough and deep enough and dark enough that your body's whole instinct is thrash for the surface, and you cannot thrash, because thrashing burns the gas you need and stirs the silt you can't see through and snags the umbilical that is your only road home. So you learn to be afraid and to keep working anyway. You learn that the fear is just weather. You learn to do the next small correct thing, check the gauge, clear the line, set the hand, and then the next one, and to let the screaming part of yourself scream in a back room while the working part of yourself stays at the panel. So I stood in the black water, and I did not flinch, and beside me the Threll, who could take 10 times the cold I could, lost his head and lunged for the shore, and was logged as failed before the water had even reached his neck. The proctor at the console did not look up when I finally walked out under my own power, last of my section, blue to the lips and steady on my feet. But I felt it logged me again. I was beginning to understand that the sieve logged everything, and that what it logged about me did not fit the shape of the thing it was looking for, and that this was a problem. I was passing the trials. I was passing them in the wrong way, for the wrong reasons, with the wrong body, and a process built to sort beings does not like a being it cannot sort. The one who liked it least had a number like the rest of us, but everyone already used his name. Candidate Vorek. He was Sithari, a species I'd not met, tall and pale-scaled with a long jaw full of small even teeth and eyes set forward like a hunter's, and he was, by every measure, the sieve openly used, the best candidate in our cohort. He topped the wall first every time it came up. He hauled sledges with the Cathani and held iron with the Threll and stood in the water with the discipline of someone who had been raised since the egg to do exactly this. His house was old and his record was spotless, and he had decided somewhere in those first 2 days that I was an insult. I understand why, looking back. Vorek had paid for his excellence. He had been bred and trained and shaped his whole life toward this selection, and he was earning his way through it the hard, honest, expensive way. And then there was a heavy, slow, gray-skinned alien more than twice his age who kept coming through the trials he should not have survived, by methods that looked like nothing. By going slow when speed was the whole point, by standing still when the trial was motion. To Vorek I was not a peer. I was noise in the signal. I was a thing the sieve had failed to sort, and a Sithari hunter, I would learn, has a deep and old need for the world to be sorted. He started small, a shoulder in a doorway, hard enough to stagger me, soft enough to deny. A weighted sledge re-rigged when I wasn't watching so the load sat wrong and bit my hands. Once, in the iron-holding trial, he positioned himself behind me in the rank and waited until my arms were failing, and then said, just under the proctor's hearing, "Set it down, old water thing. No one will think less of a creature that was never meant to be here." I held the iron. I held it past the point where my arms stopped being arms and became two columns of fire that happened to be bolted to my shoulders. I held it because I had held worse for longer in colder dark, and because the one thing I had learned about beings like Vorek, across 40 years and 3 species of foremen, is that the worst thing you can do to them is fail to react. They are looking for a response. The response is the whole transaction. If you give them nothing, if you just hold the iron and breathe and let your eyes go flat and far, the way you let them go flat and far at meter 200 when the dark is pressing on the faceplate, then you have not given them the fight they came for, and that is a kind of defeat they do not know how to process. I set the iron down when the proctor called the trial, not a second before, not a second after. Vorek had already set his down. I made sure he saw me notice that, and then I made sure he saw me not care, and his forward-set eyes did a thing I would come to know well, a flat narrowing, the look of a hunter who has found that the prey does not run. That night, they let us sleep 4 hours. In a long, cold bay on iron racks, a Sath climbed up onto the rack beside mine and sat with his knees against his chest and his crest folded down and asked me why I had helped him on the wall. "You'll get marked down for it," he said. "Helping. The sieve sorts us against each other. Everyone knows." "Probably," I said. "Then why?" I thought about how to say it. I was very tired, and the saying of true things gets harder when you're tired, not easier. "Where I come from," I said, "the water doesn't care how the company graded you. You go down with a crew. You come up with a crew. A man who'd let another man fall to make his own number look better is a man you don't put in the water again. Because the water will find him eventually, and when it does, he'll let you go too." I closed my eyes. "I don't have a number worth protecting, Iseth. I'm 43, and I wash boats for a living. The only thing I've got that's worth anything is that when somebody's coming off a wall, I get under them. That's it. That's the whole of me. I'm not going to trade it to a gray box just because the gray box is keeping score." He was quiet a while. "My brother said the sieve makes officers," he said finally. "He said it finds the ones who can command. Your brother failed." "Yes, then maybe," I said. "The sieve doesn't know what it's looking for." I did not mean it as a prophecy. I meant it as a thing to say to a frightened boy so he could sleep. But the proctor logged that too. I am sure of it now. There was a sensor in the rack bay. There were sensors everywhere, and somewhere in the gray machinery of the sieve, a line of my voice was filed, against my number, the heavy, slow water thing saying the sieve doesn't know what it's looking for. And I think that is the moment the selection decided to take me seriously, which is to say, the moment it decided to break me properly. The third dawn, they came for the leaders. There was a trial between the iron and the cold water that I have not told you about, because at the time I did not understand it had been built for me specifically, and I only understood later, reading it backward, that the sieve had started designing trials to find the edge of the thing it couldn't sort. They called it the ledge, and it was the cruelest of the early ones in the way that the cruelest things are always quiet. They took each section out to a shelf of rock above the black water, a ledge no wider than a forearm running along a sea cliff, and the trial was only to stand on it. Not climb it, not cross it, just stand, heels to the rock and toes over the drop, facing out at the open black water and the rain, until the proctor called release. There was a restraint field below. You would not have died if you came off. But coming off was failing, and the field was far enough down that your body did not believe in it, and that was the trial. The trial was your body's disbelief in your survival, stretched out over an hour, with nothing to do but stand inside it. The warstock came apart on the ledge in a way they had not come apart hauling sledges. A Cathani 3 places down from me, fast and brittle Esh's whole species, started to shake in the legs at the 20-minute mark, the deep involuntary shake that has nothing to do with strength, and she fought it, and the fighting made it worse. And at 40 minutes, her body simply revoked her permission to stand still, and she stepped back off the ledge into the field and was gone. A threll went the same way, the tireless armored threll who could hold iron all day, undone by an hour of standing still over a drop with nothing to push against. The trial was finding the beings who needed to act to stay calm, and revealing that under the right kind of pressure, those beings cannot stay calm at all, because there is nothing to act on, and a being who can only be brave by moving is not brave, he is just busy. I stood on the ledge for an hour, and it was the easiest thing they asked me all week. I am not saying that to boast. I am saying it because it is the whole of the matter. A saturation diver spends his working life standing still over a drop his body does not believe he will survive. You hang in the black at meter 200, with nothing under you and nothing around you, and your whole animal self screaming that this is death, and you do not get to thrash, and you do not get to act. You get to hang there and breathe and wait, and let the screaming be weather. Standing on a ledge in the rain for an hour, toes over a drop, doing nothing, that was not a trial to me. That was Tuesday. That was the most ordinary state my body has ever been trained into, and the sieve, which had built the ledge to find the beings who could not endure stillness over a drop, found instead a being for whom stillness over a drop was the resting state, and it logged that, and it did not know what to do with it. The proctor on the ledge called my number to release me last, after the whole section, and when I stepped back off the rock onto solid ground, my legs were not shaking, and the proctor looked at me, and I looked back, flat and far, and I think that was the trial, where the sieve stopped treating me as noise and started treating me as a question. By that night, we were under 300, and the failures had stopped being random. The early trials had taken the weak in body. The ledge had taken the ones who could only be calmed by moving. Each trial was a finer mesh than the one before, and the mesh was sized more and more to catch exactly the war stock the sieve had spent 60 years selecting for. The strong, the fast, the dominant, the ones who acted, and to let through, by accident, a thing that endured by holding still, which was the one shape the machine had never been built to catch, because its builder had never imagined it was worth catching. Eseth made it through the ledge by counting. I taught him that, the night before, on the iron rack. Give your mind a small dull job and feed it the job slowly so it cannot wander to the drop. Count your own breaths. When you lose count, start over and do not be angry that you lost count, because the losing and the starting over is the job. He stood on the ledge for an hour counting his breaths and starting over, and he came off it with his crest folded but his feet under him, and that night he told me he had never in his life been taught that you could survive a thing by making your mind smaller instead of bigger. My house teaches you to master fear, he said, to rise above it, to be greater than it. That worked until you meet a fear that's greater than you, I said. Then you need the other thing. What other thing? You don't master the fear, I said. You just don't feed it. You give your hand something small to do, and you let the fear stand in the corner, and you don't look at it. It's still there. It's always still there. You just stop giving it the wheel. I closed my eyes on the iron rack. Mastering fear is a young being's idea. I'm 43. I don't master anything anymore. I just outlast it. He thought about that a long time, the way he thought about everything I said, turning it over to see if it was load-bearing. I have wondered since whether anything I told that boy on the iron racks is the reason he made line, command, or whether he had it in him all along and only needed a being to say it out loud. I will never know. You never know which words held in another being's life. You just say the true ones and let the load find out. The sieve has watched you carry yourselves, the warden said. On the third dawn, with the 290 of us drawn up in the cold. Now it will watch you carry others. From this hour, you do not stand for yourselves. You stand for a section. The section's failure is your failure. The section's death is your death. He did not mean death literally, I think. With the sieve, it was never entirely clear. They broke us into sections of 10 and named a leader for each, and the naming was the trap. The sieve did not choose the leaders by merit. It chose them, I came to understand, by something closer to instinct. It reached into the cohort and pulled out the candidates it had decided were the natural shape of an officer, the ones whose grades and bearing and house stock said command, and it set them over 9 others and waited to see whether the shape held when weight was put on it. It made Vorek a leader. Of course it did. He was the best candidate by every measure it used. It made me a leader too. I did not understand that at first. When the proctor read 0117 in the list of section leaders, I assumed an error, and I nearly said so, which would have been a mistake because the sieve does not make the errors you think it makes. It had not put me in charge of 9 candidates because it admired me. It had put me in charge of 9 candidates because it could not sort me, and it had decided to find out what I was by giving me people to break against, the way you find out what a beam is made of by loading it until it bends. My 9 were the leavings. I saw that fast. The sieve had given the strong sections to the strong leaders, and it had given me the candidates it had already half written off. The slow, the damaged, the ones who had come through the early trials by luck or stubbornness and would not come through the later ones at all. There was Eseth, his confidence cracked since the wall. There was a thrall named Gon who had nearly drowned in the standing water trial and now flinched from the tide line. There was a Cathini called Esh who was fast and brittle, all sprint and no floor under it. There was a small gray Drellhan, young even for a candidate, who flinched from everything and whose number I had to read off her hand for 2 days before I trusted myself to remember it. 244, and her name was Mira. There were 5 more, each a different kind of liability, and the sieve had handed them to the water thing to see how fast the water thing section collapsed. The first section trial was a march. Cross the broken ground east of the field, all 10 of you, carry a sealed casket between you that masses more than any 2 candidates could lift. Alone, reach the marker before the light turns. A section that arrived incomplete failed. A section that arrived without the casket failed. A section that arrived after the light failed. I gathered my 9 in the lee of a bunker before they ran us out, and I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was to run it like a salvage job. Nobody carries the casket the whole way, I said. We rotate. 4 on, 6 resting, swap every 200 steps. Gon, you're strongest. You anchor the front corner. Esh, you're fastest. You're not on the casket at all. You run ahead and find us the flattest line through the broken ground. Because the casket is going to want to twist us into the holes, and we can't afford a turned ankle. Isath, you count the steps and call the swaps. The small gray one flinched at her number. Then at her name, you carry nothing. You watch all of us. Anybody starts to fail, you tell me before they fall, not after. That's your whole job. You're the eyes. Understood, she stared at me. I do not think anyone had ever given her a job she could actually do. Understood, she said. It was an ugly march and we were not fast. Vorek's section passed us inside the first kilometer, his 9 moving in a tight, disciplined column with the casket riding smooth on their shoulders, and he looked back at us, strung out, rotating, Esh scouting ahead like a mad thing, the casket lurching, and I saw the contempt come off him in a wave. We looked like chaos. We looked like exactly the failing section the sieve had built us to be. But the broken ground east of the field was, it turned out, a death trap of soft holes under a crust of wet grit, and a tight, disciplined column moving fast was the worst possible thing to be on it. 2 kilometers out, we came up on Vorek's section, stopped dead, one of his 9 down with a leg punched through the crust to the knee and the casket, grounded because they could not carry it and lift their fallen at the same time, and Vorek standing over the hurt one with his long jaw working, caught between the rule that said arrive complete and the rule that said arrive before the light, and unable to solve for both because he had never in his bred and trained and expensive life had to. We did not stop to gloat. There wasn't time, and it isn't in me anyway. Esh, I said, you've been reading the ground for 2 kilometers. Can you read theirs? She could. She went ahead of Vorek's column and found them the firm line, the way she'd been finding it for us, and she called it back, and Mira watched both sections now, 18 candidates, and called the failing ones before they fell, and Gon, squat, armored, tireless Gon, who had nearly drowned and been written off. Gon got under the grounded casket of Vorek's section and held it up off the crust with his back, while 3 of Vorek's 9 pulled their hurt one free. We did not carry their casket for them. That would have failed them on the rules and mine on the time. We held the ground steady under it long enough for them to carry it themselves. Both sections reached the marker before the light turned, complete. Both caskets in. Vorek did not thank me. I had not expected him to. But the proctor at the marker logged something it had not logged before. I felt the difference, the way you feel a current change in dark water before you can name it. And that night the warden came to the rack bay himself, which the warden did not do, and he walked the length of the iron rack slow on his heavy legs, and he stopped at mine, and he looked down at me with his flat black eyes for a long moment. You spent your section's strength to lift a rival's load, he said. Explain. I didn't lift their load, I said. I held their ground. There's a difference. The sieve sorts you against them. You keep saying that, I said. I was too tired to dress it up. But you put a casket between 10 of us and called it a section. A casket between 10 people isn't a sorting. It's a crew. And a crew doesn't walk past another crew that's grounded, because the ground that took them is the same ground we're all standing on, and a man who walks past it once will walk past it when it's you in the hole. I let my head go back against the iron rack. You want to know what I am, Warden? That's what I am. I'm the one who doesn't walk past. You can mark it down however you like. He stood there a while. The pewter skin beaded the rack bay damp and stayed dry. Then he said something that I did not understand until much later, and that I have thought about every day since. The being who built the sieve, the warden said, believed that command could be measured. He believed it was a property of the candidate, like strength, like reach, like recovery. He spent his life proving it. He was the finest officer his people ever produced, and when he grew too old to serve, he built this place to find the next of him, and he has been finding them for 60 years. And the fleets he supplies have the highest officer loss rate in the charted volume. The warden's voice did not change at all. We do not say that aloud. The houses would not wager their sons if they heard it. But the sieve makes officers who win trials, and the trials are not the war. And out in the war, the thing that keeps a crew alive is not the thing the sieve measures. We have known this for a long time. We did not have a word for the thing the sieve was missing. He looked at me. You may be a word, he said, and walked back out into the rain. I lay on the iron rack and did not sleep. Across the bay, Vorek was awake too. I could feel it, his forward-set eyes open in the dark, and I understood that the warden had not done me a kindness. He had painted a target. Whatever the sieve was now beginning to measure in me, It was a thing that made everything Vorik had paid for worth less, and a Sathari hunter who has paid for excellence and finds it devalued does not bend, he sharpens. The fourth dawn, the trial stopped being stupid and started being cruel. They put us in the dark and took the air away a little at a time. That was the fourth trial, and it was the first one that frightened me, because it was the first one that touched the actual edge of the thing I had spent my life walking. They sealed each section into a low chamber off the bunker line, 10 of us and one console, and the console showed a single descending number that was the breathable air in the room, and the only way the number stopped descending was if the section solved the panel, a tangle of valves and seals and pressure logic that had to be worked in the correct order by feel, in a dark that thickened as the air thinned. A Sathari can hold breath a long time. A Threll can metabolize low air. The Vaelsa, hollow and efficient, sip oxygen like misers. By every measure the sieve used, a human should have been the first in any section to go down in a room with the air running out. But I had done this. Not this exact thing, but the shape of it. I had been at depth with a gas supply failing and a problem to solve before the supply failed all the way, and the lesson of that, the lesson written into me below thought, is that the air is not the emergency. The panic is the emergency. The air, even when it is running out, lasts longer than your fear tells you it will, and a being who keeps working calm uses a fraction of what a being who thrashes uses. The whole of survival, down there in the thinning dark, is the discipline of spending your fear slowly. So when the lights went amber, and then dim and then out, and my section started to come apart, Esh hyperventilating, fast twitch and brittle, burning the air twice as fast as she needed to, Gon going rigid, Isath's breath climbing, I did the thing I would have done on a failing rig. I made them slow down. Listen to my voice, I said, into the dark, low and flat and unhurried. The voice you use when the faceplate is fogged and the man on the other end of the line is starting to lose it. Nobody is dying. The air in this room will outlast the trial if we don't waste it. Esh, breathe with me. In for 4, hold, out for 4, slower than feels right. Slower, that's it. I put my hand on the panel by feel and found the first valve. Myra, you're small and you're low and the bad air rises, so you've got the cleanest breaths in this room. I need you on the floor by me, hands on the panel, telling me what your fingers find while I tell you the order. We're going to solve this together. You and me, slow, and the rest of you are going to lie flat and breathe with my count and do nothing else. The less you do, the more air you leave us to work in. Doing nothing is the job. Can you all do nothing? They could do nothing. It turned out to be the hardest thing I ever asked of them, and they did it. Mira and I worked the panel by feel in the dark, my hands too big for it, hers exactly the right size, and I read her the logic. Close the low valve before you open the high one, always. The way you equalize before you ascend, never the other way or the whole thing locks. And she found the valves and I called the order, and behind us, 9 beings lay flat in the thinning dark and breathed on my count and did the brutal discipline nothing that was keeping them alive. We solved the panel with the air number low enough that I could feel the edges of it in my own head, the gray closing in at the corners of thought that I knew from depth, and I worked through it the way I had learned to, because the gray lies. The gray always says you have less time than you have. The lights came up, the air number climbed. My 9 were all conscious. All 10 of us walked out of that room. 2 sections did not. I learned that later. 2 sections solved the panel too slow because their leaders had let the fear run loose. And in those rooms beings went down before the air came back, and the sieve revived them and washed them out. Because a section that loses its discipline in the dark is a section that, out in the war, loses its ship. The sieve was not wrong about that. The sieve had never been wrong about what it was testing. It had only been wrong about what made a being pass it, and it had spent 60 years selecting for the wrong cause of the right effect. Vorac's section walked out too. He had held them together by sheer dominance, by being the strongest will in a dark room full of failing wills, and it had worked. And the cost of it was that his 9 came out hating the dark and hating the room and a little bit hating him, while my 9 came out having discovered that they could do the impossible thing if someone calm asked them to do it slowly. That is the difference the warden had no word for. Vorak made his section survive. I made mine able. He found me after. There was a wash bay where they let us scrape the grit off between trials, cold water and a stone floor, and he came in while I was rinsing the panel grease off my hands, and he stood close, the way a hunter stands close, and his small even teeth were showing. You cheat, he said, not the rules. Worse, you make them weak. You teach them to lean on you, and when you are gone, and you will be gone, water thing, the sieve will see to it, they will fall, because you taught them to need a thing that washes boats for a living. You are not making officers. You are making cripples who survived one more day. I rinsed my hands. I did not hurry. 40 years of foreman had taught me that the man who needs you to argue is the man you beat by not arguing. You might be right, I said. That stopped him. He'd come for a fight. I might be, I said. Maybe I taught Mira to lean on me. Or maybe I taught her she could read a valve in the dark. Which she can, which she just did, which she'll be able to do whether I'm there or not. I shut the water off. Here's the thing you don't know about leaning, Vorik, because nobody's ever let you lean on anything. A green diver leans on his supervisor with his whole weight, hangs on every word. And the supervisor lets him, because the leaning is how the green diver learns the supervisor's calm is a real thing and not a lie, and once he's felt it's real, he starts growing his own. And one day he's the calm one, and some other green diver is leaning on him. That's not weakness. That's how a calm gets passed down a line so it doesn't die with one man. I dried my hands on my filthy sleeve. You hold your 9 up by being stronger than their fear. The day you fall, their fear's still there, full size, and you're not. I'm trying to make mine bigger than their fear, so the day I fall it doesn't matter. You're building a ceiling, Vorik. I'm building a floor. Out in the war, ceilings come down. He hit me. I'd half expected it, and I let it land, mostly, turning with it so the long Sithari jaw caught my cheekbone instead of my temple, and it still rang my whole skull and put me down on one knee on the wet stone. He stood over me with his hands still open, and his crest of spines up and his eyes flat, waiting for the thing he'd come for, the thing he needed, the response that would make this a fight between two candidates and not a thing he'd done to a creature who wouldn't fight back. I got up, slow. I have been hit by water, moving faster than any fist by 60-knot seas that took me off my feet and held me under, and a young hunter's open hand was not the worst thing that had happened to my face that decade. I got up and I looked at him flat and far, the meter 200 look, and I gave him nothing. No anger, no fear, not even much interest. You done? I said. A proctor was in the doorway. I had not heard it arrive. They never made a sound. The proctors, on their soft, heavy Drellin feet, and this one had a band on its arm and a console in its hand, and it had logged the whole thing. Vorik's strike, my refusal to return it, all of it. And Vorik saw it too, and the blood went out of his pale scales in a way I'd learned meant a Sithari had just understood it had made a serious mistake. Because the sieve sorts you against each other, yes. But the sieve was, that week, learning a new thing to measure, and a candidate who strikes a section leader in a wash bay, because that leader will not fight him, is a candidate revealing exactly the thing the war kills crews with. The contempt for the floor, the need to win small, the brittleness dressed as strength. The proctor said nothing and withdrew. But that night Vorik's number was read for a solo trial, alone away from his section, and a candidate pulled from his section for a solo trial knows what it means. The sieve had begun quietly to measure him too, and it was not liking what it found. The 5th dawn the sieve changed the rules on all of us, and the cruelty stopped being a thing they did to our bodies and became a thing they did to our choices. Before they changed the rules to the trade, there was one more trial of the old kind, and it was the one that broke my section's faith in the sieve for good, which turned out to matter more than passing it. They called it the relay. Each section was given a load, a sealed crate, heavy, awkward, the size of a body, and a course through the broken ground and the bunkers and up a service shaft and back. And the rule was that the load could never touch the ground. Never, not for an instant. From the moment the trial began to the moment it crossed the line, a load that touched ground failed the section. And the course was long enough that no being in a section could carry the load for more than a stretch of it, which meant the whole thing was handoffs, 10 beings passing a body-sized weight hand to hand across broken ground and up a shaft and back without ever once setting it down, and a single fumble, a single missed grip, a single being whose strength gave out a heartbeat before the next pair of hands arrived ended everyone. It is, I will say, a real skill. A crew that can pass a load like that is a crew that can do a great many useful things. But the sieve graded it on speed, fastest section first, and grading a handoff trial on speed is how you teach beings to rush the handoff, and rushing the handoff is exactly how you drop the load. The trial rewarded the thing that made the trial fail. I have met that design in human institutions too. It is the signature of an organization that has forgotten what it is for. We did not rush. I made us slow, again, the only trick I have. I had gone, and the strongest take the long carries and the weak take the short ones, and I made every handoff a deliberate thing. Both pairs of hands on the load, weight confirmed, called aloud before the first pair let go, the way you pass a tool across a gap in vacuum where dropping it means it's gone forever. Have it, got it, clear. 3 words, every handoff, no exceptions. Even when we were exhausted, even when the fast sections were a bunker ahead of us. Have it, got it, clear. The load never touched ground. We finished slow, near the back, but we finished, and the load never once left a pair of hands. Vorik's section finished first, of course, and Vorik's section dropped their load 40 meters from the line. I saw it. We all saw it. They had run the whole course faster than anyone. A tight, dominant column eating the broken ground, and on the last straight with the line in sight one of his 9, a Vialza whose arms had been failing for the last 100 meters and who had been too proud or too afraid to call it, lost the load on a handoff that came a half-second too fast, and the crate hit the ground, and the trial was over for all 10 of them, faster than any section in the cohort, and failed, because speed was the thing they'd been rewarded for, and speed was the thing that dropped the load. The proctor logged it. Vorik stood over the grounded crate with his crest of spines up and his long jaw working, and for the first time all week the contempt was not aimed at me. It was aimed at the failing Vaelsa, the one whose arms had given out, and Vorik said something to that candidate, low, that I did not hear and did not need to, because I have heard the shape of it from foremen my whole life. The leader who blames the weakest hand for the failure of a system the leader rushed. The Vaelsa folded his crest and took it. He had no defense. He had dropped the load. By the only logic he'd been given, it was his fault. It was not his fault. It was Vorik's, for running a handoff trial like a sprint, for never once calling have it, got it, clear, for building a section that moved fast and trusted nothing, so that when one hand failed there was no slow, deliberate grip waiting to catch the load. But the sieve logged it as the Vaelsa's failure, and the Vaelsa was washed out that night, and Vorik's section went on 8 strong, having learned the exact wrong lesson, that the failure had been a weak hand, and the answer was to cut weak hands faster. My section watched all of it, and that night, on the iron racks, something shifted in them that I felt before I understood. Mira climbed up beside me, the small gray Drelhan, and she said very quietly, we were slowest, and we finished, and they were fastest and they failed. She turned the fact over the way Iseth turned things over. The sieve is grading the wrong thing. Yes, I said. It's been grading the wrong thing the whole time. Probably for a long time, I said. Longer than us. She was quiet. And then she said the thing that I have kept, out of everything said in that whole cold week. Then we are not failing the sieve, she said. The sieve is failing us, and we are passing anyway by ignoring how it wants us to pass. She looked at me with her flinching gray eyes that had stopped flinching somewhere around the 4th dawn. That is a strange way to win. It's the only way I've ever won anything, I told her. Find out what the thing actually measures, not what it says it measures, and serve the true thing and ignore the lie. The water doesn't grade you on speed either. The water grades you on whether you come back up. Everything that calls itself a test is really just asking that underneath, whether you'll come back up and bring your crew with you. The smart ones figure out the underneath. The sieve forgot its own underneath 60 years ago, so we'll just serve it for them. She put her small hand flat on the iron rack between us, not on my chest yet, that came later, but on the cold iron, as close as she could get to the gesture without making it, and she said her number, and then mine, 0204-0117, the way you'd name a pair, and she went back to her rack, and I lay in the dark and listened to 9 beings the sieve had written off, breathe slow and even and unafraid, and I thought, not for the first time, that whatever the old officer had built this machine to find, he had built it to find the wrong 9, and the 9 he'd thrown away as ballast were learning the only thing worth learning, which is how to be the rope. The 5th dawn came, and with it the trade, and the sieve finally started asking the right question. But my section had already answered it on the iron racks the night the fast ones dropped the load. They just answered it before the question was asked, the way the best crews always do. From this dawn, the warden said, the sieve will not test what you can do, it will test what you will trade. Every trial from here offers you a choice. You may pass it whole, alone, and rise, or you may pass it carrying weight that is not yours, and the weight will slow you, and slowness is failure, and failure ends you. The sieve will record what each of you chooses. Choose honestly. There is no choice that is safe. This was the part of the selection that the houses did not understand when they wagered their sons, and it was, I came to believe, the only part the dying old officer who built the sieve had gotten exactly right, even if he'd built the whole rest of the machine around the wrong measure. Because the trials of strength and endurance in the dark were all proxies, all attempts to measure command from the outside by watching the body, and the body lies. But this, a being's choice under load, between rising alone and carrying another, this was the thing itself, naked. You could not fake your way through it. The sieve was finally, in its last days, asking the right question. It just didn't know yet that I'd been answering it my whole life. The 5th trial was a climb again, the wall, but this time they'd rigged it so each section had a single ascender line, and a single line could carry 1 candidate fast or 2 candidates slow, and at the top was a release that opened a door, and the door stayed open exactly long enough for the line to make 1 trip if it ran fast and empty. The math was naked and ugly. One of your section could go up alone and open the door, and the rest would have to free climb the wet wall in the time the door allowed, and the weak ones in your section would not make it, and they would be left, and the sieve does not come back for those who remain. Or you could send no one up alone. You could put the strongest on the line carrying the weakest, slow, and burn the door's whole window getting your liabilities up first, and trust the strong to free climb in whatever scraps of time were left, and probably lose them instead. Either way you traded. The sieve was watching which way. Vorik went up alone. I watched him do it. His section had a candidate as weak as my weakest, a small trembling Vaelsa who could not free climb that wall wet in a year of dawns, and Vorik looked at her and made the cold, correct calculation that the sieve's whole 60 years had trained him to make, that a leader's first duty is to survive, that you cannot command from the bottom of a wall, that the weak are the wager the house already accepted losing, and he clipped onto the line alone and went up fast and clean and opened the door, and 7 of his 9 free climbed it in time, and the small trembling one and one other did not, and they were left at the bottom of the wall, and Vorik did not look back, and the sieve logged that he had passed. I want to be fair to him. By the only logic he had ever been given, he was right. He kept 8 of 10. He kept himself the most valuable piece. He made the trade a fleet admiral makes, the trade the textbooks call correct, and there is a version of war where it is correct, and the old officer who built the sieve had won that version of war, and built a machine to find more beings who would make that trade without flinching. I made the other trade. I did not send myself up the line. I am the heaviest being in my section and the slowest on a wet wall and the worst possible candidate to spend the line's speed on. I put Gun on the line, strongest, and I had him carry Mira up first, slow, the smallest and most frightened, and then come back down the line and carry Iseth. And the door's window burned down while he did it, and the rest of us free climbed in the scraps. I went last. I went last because the leader goes last off a sinking thing. That is not a philosophy, that is just what you do. And I free climbed that wet wall at 43 years old with my arms already dead from a week of trials, and I did it slow. 3 points, wait, reach, the diver's climb, and I came through the door as it was closing with the door's edge brushing my heel. All 10 of us, through. I did not do it to win. I want that clear because the sieve wrote it down as a kind of winning, and that was never what it was. I did it because I have left people behind exactly once early, when I was young and green and the supervisor said, cut the line and surface, and I cut the line and surfaced, and a man I'd gone down with did not come up. And the math that day was correct too. The math is always correct, and I have carried that man up out of that water in my sleep every few weeks for 20 years. And I decided a long time ago that I would rather drown with a crew than surface without one. That is not courage. It is something smaller and more stubborn. It is just the only way I have found to be able to sleep. When I came through the door, Mira was there, on the far side, small and gray and shaking, and she did a thing then that no candidate had done to me in the whole of the selection. She put her small hand flat against my chest, over the heart, which I would later learn is a Drellhan gesture, the gesture you make to the one who held the ground under you. And she said my number, 0117, the way you'd say a name, and then she said an actual word in her own language that I did not know. And Isath, behind her, translated it quiet. Anchor, he said. It means the thing the rope ties to. It means the thing that doesn't move when everything else does. I did not have anything to say to that. I am not built for being thanked. I put my hand on the small gray shoulder for a second, and then I told them all to rest, because resting was the job now, and they rested. Vorik watched the whole thing from across the staging floor. 8 of his 10 around him, 2 of them gone, and he watched the humans 10, all 10, the leavings, the written off, the section the sieve had built to fail, sit together whole on the far side of the door, and I saw something move behind his forward-set eyes that was not contempt. It was worse than contempt for him. It was doubt. He had made the correct trade and kept 8. And the broken old water thing had made the wrong trade and kept 10. And the arithmetic he had built his whole self on had just come out wrong in front of him. And a being like Vorik does not survive his arithmetic coming out wrong. He needs it to be a trick. He needs the universe to resort itself so that he is again the best, the correct, the sorted. That night they read his number for another solo trial. And another. The sieve was running him alone now, over and over, and I understood what it was doing because the warden had told me in his way. The sieve had spent 60 years certain that command was a property of the candidate, like reach, like recovery. And here at the end of its long, wrong life, it had finally found 2 beings who let it test the thing directly. A Sathari who made the correct trade, and a human who made the other one, and it could not let the question go. It was running Vorik alone to find out whether the thing it had always measured, the dominance, the strength, the will, could be made to produce the floor I built without my help. Whether you could get a crew that stays whole out of a being who keeps himself first. You cannot. I could have told it that for free. But the sieve had to learn it the way it learned everything. by loading a thing until it bent. It bent Vorik on the sixth dawn, and when it bent him, it nearly killed every one of us. And the choice it put in front of me then was not a trial the sieve had written. It was a real one. The sixth trial was the one they called the Deep, and it was held in the black water. I should have known the sieve would put me in the water eventually. It had spent 5 days learning that the water was where I lived, and a machine built to break beings does not leave a being's own ground alone. It goes there last and hardest to break you on the very thing you trust. They took the whole surviving cohort, 110 of us now, out along a causeway into the Black Bay to a cluster of flooded test hulls anchored in deep water, old ship sections sunk on purpose and rigged with sealed compartments and flood valves and a single dry core at the center of each, and the trial was simple to say and brutal to do. Get your section through the flooded hull to the dry core before the rising tide sealed the only exit. The hulls flooded as you worked them. The valves had to be cycled in order. Underwater by feel, the same equalize before you ascend logic as the air room, but wetter and colder and dark. This was, of all the trials, the one I could actually do, not endure. The flooded hull was a salvage job. It was the only thing in the entire selection that was mine, that played to a human's worst body and best training, and I felt something I had not felt since I walked off my last paying job, which was the clean, flat competence of a man doing the thing he was made to do. I took my 10 into that hull, and I worked it like I'd worked 100 flooded wrecks, slow and methodical, valve by valve, holding the calm and passing it down the line, and we were moving through it well. We were going to make it with margin. Then the hull beside ours stopped sending light. Each hull had a core light that burned through the murk to tell the proctors a section had reached the dry center. Vorik's section was in the hull beside ours, and in the middle of our own ascent through the dark I saw, through a flooded gap in the hull wall, that Vorik's core light had gone out, and that there was movement in the water over there that was the wrong kind of movement, the thrashing kind, the drowning kind, and I understood in one cold drop of the stomach what had happened. The sieve had bent him. 6 days of being run alone, of watching his arithmetic come out wrong, of doubt working into a being who had no practice at doubt, it had finally bent him. And a bent Sethari does not get calm, he gets frantic, and somewhere in that flooded hull Vorik had lost the order of the valves or lost his nerve or lost both, and his section was flooding faster than he could solve it, and his 8 were in the dark in the cold rising water with a leader who had come apart, and the exit on their hull was sealing, and the proctors on the causeway were 100 meters of black water away. Here is the choice the sieve did not write. My section was clear. We had margin. We could reach our dry core and pass, all 10 of us, whole and rise, and I would be, at 43, washed out, sponsored as a joke, the leader of the only section in the cohort to bring every candidate through every trial. I had the win. The actual win, the one the houses wagered for, the one Vorik had clawed at all week, and the sieve had been quietly handing to me. It was right there in the dry core ahead of us. And on the other side of a flooded hull wall, the being who had hit me in a wash bay was drowning, and his 8 were drowning with him, because he had been built wrong by a machine that didn't know what it was building. I have told you I left a man behind once, when I was green. I have told you what it did to me. I want to tell you that the choice was hard, that I weighed it, that there was a moment of real decision. There wasn't. There was just the old thing in me that is below thought, the thing that hears the specific sound of a person about to go under and moves before the rest of me has voted, and I was already turning toward the flooded gap before I had decided anything at all. Gone, I said fast. Take them to the core. You know the order now. You've watched me do it 6 days. You can do it without me. Get our 10 to the dry core. That's the job. Go. You go. Mira, you read for Gon the way you read for me. You're the eyes. Go. And I went through the gap into Vorik's flooding hull, into the dark and the cold and the rising water and the thrashing alone, because there was no time to bring help and no one else in that water who knew flooded steel the way I did. It was bad in there. It was as bad as anything I'd been in. Vorik's section had panicked as a unit, the way a section panics when its leader breaks, and panic in flooding steel is a contagion that kills faster than the water. And I came into a black compartment full of drowning beings who would, in their terror, drown me too if I let them, because that is what drowning beings do. They climb you. They use you as a thing to push down on to get up. It is not malice, it is just the animal. And I had been climbed before, and I knew the only way through it was to be the calmest thing in the water and to make my calm louder than their fear. I found Vorik first because he was the stillest, and the stillest in a drowning section is the worst sign. The stillness is not calm, it is the body beginning to give up. He had gotten the valve order wrong, locked the system the way it locks when you open high before closing low, and the hull was flooding through a seal that would not close. And he was hanging in the dark water with his crest flat and his small, even teeth parted and the fight going out of him, and his forward-set hunter's eyes found me in the murk with an expression I will not forget, because it was the expression of a being watching the thing he had hit and devalued and called a cripple maker come through a flooded wall to get him. I put my face close to his in the black water, and I made the only sound that carries through flooded steel, which is a hand slammed flat 3 times on the hull, the diver's signal, attend, attend, attend. And I got his eyes, and I held them, and I did the thing I had been doing all week, the thing the sieve had no word for. I made him slow. Down there, in the killing dark with no air to spare, I made a drowning hunter breathe the dregs of the air pocket against the compartment ceiling on. My count, in for 4, hold, and I got him still enough to be useful, and then I put his hands on the locked valve, and I worked the order through him. Close the low before the high, always, the ways you equalize before you ascend, and his hands were stronger than mine, and mine knew the order. And together, the human and the broken Sethari, we closed the seal that he alone could not close, and the flooding stopped. It did not save them by itself. Stopping the flood just bought time, and time in cold water runs out too. I had to get 8 panicked beings and 1 broken leader through the rest of that hull to the exit before the tide sealed it, and I did it the only way it can be done, by making myself the anchor, the thing the rope ties to, the thing that does not move when everything else does, and running them out 1 and 2 at a time, calm, slow, passing my calm down a line of beings who had never been given any, and Vorik, once he could think again, got under the last of them and helped, because whatever else he was not, in the end, a being who would let his 8 drown once he'd remembered how not to. We came out of the ceiling exit into open black water with the tide closing the hull behind us like a mouth, all 9 of Vorik's section and me, and we surfaced into the rain and the Proctor's lights, and 100 meters down the causeway Gon had already brought my 10 to the dry core, all whole, and the human section had passed, but I had not been in the dry core when it passed. The leader of the section had been in the wrong hull, saving a rival's crew, and a leader who is not with his section when it completes a trial has. By every rule the warden read us on the first dawn failed the trial. I trod the cold water, and I knew it, and I did not care, and I was so tired that the not caring felt almost like peace. I had made the trade. I had made it on purpose this time, eyes open, the real one, the one that costs you, and the cost was that the only section to bring every candidate through every trial would do it without its leader, because its leader had gone into the dark for the being who'd called him a cripple maker, and the sieve, the great cold sorting machine, would have to mark me failed. On the causeway, under the lights, the warden was waiting. And beside him, dry in all that rain, was an old Sethari I had never seen, in a coat with no house marks and no rank, leaning on a cane, watching me come up out of his black water with an expression I could not read at all. The old Sethari was the one who had built the sieve. I knew it before anyone told me. You can always tell the being who made the machine you are standing inside, because the machine is shaped like the inside of his head. And this old one with his cane and his unmarked coat had the look of a being standing in a room he had built 60 years ago, and was only now beginning to understand he had built wrong. He had been, the warden told me later, the finest officer his people ever produced. He had survived wars that ate whole fleets. And when he grew too old to serve, he had set out to bottle the thing that had kept him and his crews alive, to make it teachable, repeatable, sortable, so that no fleet would ever again have to trust to the accident of the right being in the right chair. He had spent his last 60 years on it, and he had been the whole time measuring the wrong thing, because the thing that had kept his crews alive was never in him the way strength was in him. It had been in what he chose, again and again, when the trade was offered, and choice does not show up on a wall or in a sledge haul or in how long you can hold iron over your head. And so he had built a magnificent machine that measured everything about a being except the one thing that mattered. And the fleets he supplied had buried their officers at the highest rate in the charted volume, and he had not let himself know why. He let himself know it that night, I think, watching a washed-out human come up out of the flooded dark, having traded a clean win for a rival's drowning crew. He did not say anything grand. The grand thing would have been to clear me, to overrule the rule, to declare the human past and the sieve corrected. He did not do that. He was too honest in his cold old way, and I respected him for it even then, dripping and freezing on the causeway. The rule is the rule, he said. His voice was thin and very old. You were not with your section. You failed the trial. The sieve will record it. I will not unwrite a rule to flatter a result, even this result. That is how the rot started, 60 years of unwriting the inconvenient and keeping the flattering. No more. I didn't do it to pass, I said. You can mark it however you want. I know you didn't. He looked at me a long moment with those forward-set eyes that all his people had, the same eyes as Vorek's, and I understood Vorek a little better, seeing where the line he came from ended up. A being who had spent his whole life certain that excellence was a thing you owned and was now at the very end finding out it was a thing you spent. That is precisely the difficulty. The sieve cannot pass you because you broke its rule. And the sieve cannot be allowed to fail you because you did the only true thing any candidate has done inside it in 60 years. A machine that fails the one being who proved it wrong is a machine that should be torn down. He was quiet. The rain came down between us. So, we will tear it down. He did not mean it as a kindness to me. He meant it as the last honest act of an honest being who had spent his life on a wrong premise and had just too late found out they did not graduate me. I want that on the record because the easy version of this story is the one where the human passes the impossible test and rises, and that is not what happened, and it would dishonor the thing if I let you believe it. I failed the sixth trial by the rule, and the rule stood, and the sieve recorded 01 Senfin as failed, and a being recorded as failed does not become an officer of the fleets. That was the cost. I had known it in the water, and I paid it on the causeway, and I've never once regretted it, but I paid it, and it was real. What the old Sithari did instead was burn the machine down around me. He suspended the selection. He gathered the surviving cohort and the warden and the proctors in the cold muster yard under the rain on the seventh dawn, the dawn that was supposed to be the last cut, and he stood on his cane in front of all of us, and he did the hardest thing I have ever watched a proud being do, which was to stand in the place he had built and say, out loud before the sons of every house that had wagered them, that he had been wrong for 60 years. I built this to measure command, he said. I measured strength and called it command. I measured will and called it command. I measured the candidate because I was a being who had always had the answer inside himself, and I could not imagine that the thing I was looking for did not live inside a being at all, but in the space between him and the ones he is responsible for, and only shows itself the instant he is offered the trade and made to choose. His thin voice did not shake. Conjudant 01 was submitted as a courtesy. He is 43 of his years old, which is old. He has no martial training. He failed to top the wall first on any dawn. He is the slowest being in this cohort and the weakest by every measure this machine was built to take. And he is the only one of you I would, without hesitation, put in a chair with my grandchildren's lives aboard the ship, because he is the only one of you who has shown me, under a true load, that when the trade comes he will not surface without his crew. He looked at me then, and at Vorik beside me, the two of us, the human and the bent Sithari who had come up out of the water together. And the candidate I built this machine to find, he said, quieter, the one who tops every wall and makes every correct trade. I have been supplying him to the fleets for 60 years, and burying him, and the crews with him. Not because he is weak, because he was taught by me that the chair is the prize, and the chair is not the prize. The chair is the place you sit to be the last one off the ship. Vorik did not say anything. His crest was flat. But he was listening in the way a being listens when something he built his whole self on is being taken apart, and I will tell you that I had more hope for Vorik in that moment than I'd had all week, because a being who can stand and listen to that, and not flee it and not strike it, is a being who might yet learn the floor. They rebuilt the selection. It took years. I heard about it secondhand. They kept the trials of strength and dark and water, because those are real, and a fleet needs beings who can do them. But they stopped grading them as command. Command they tested the only way it can be tested, the way the old officer had stumbled into in his machine's last days, by the trade, by the choice under load, by which way a being turns when offered the clean win at the cost of the crew. And they did something else, which the warden told me about a long time after, in a letter that found me on a salvage boat 3 systems from anywhere. They made every section leader on the last dawn spend a day learning from a being who had never been an officer and never would be. They called it the floor lesson. They brought in working beings, divers, deckhands, miners, the ones who do the dangerous mundane trades where you go down with a crew and come up, with a crew or not at all. And they had them teach the candidates the thing that does not show up on a wall. The first being they brought in to teach the floor lesson was me. I went. I was crewing a salvage rig by then, back to my own life, the only life I'd ever really wanted. And they paid me a working being's day rate to come stand in front of a cohort of the finest young war stock the galaxy could grow and teach them the one thing I knew, which was how to be the anchor. The thing the rope ties to. The thing that does not move when everything else does. Sath was an officer by then, real one, line command. He came to the floor lesson, though he didn't need it, and stood at the back with his crest up bright, and afterward he walked me out to my rig in the rain. They named the trade after you, he said, in the new selection. When a candidate gives up the clean win to keep the crew whole, the proctors log it as a Brennan trade, after your name. It's in the manual. I didn't have anything to say to that either. I am still not built for it. Did you ever find out, Asath asked, Why the sieve couldn't sort you on the first day. You said it didn't know what it was looking for. I thought about it, standing in the rain by my rig, 43 years old and washed out, and the only being whose name was in a manual I'd never read. It was looking inside us, I said. Strength, reach, will, all the things that live in one being. It built a whole machine to look inside us, because it was built by a being who'd always found the answer inside himself. I looked out at the black water, my water, the only thing in that whole place that had ever felt like home. But the thing it wanted was never inside any of us. It's the rope between us. You can't sort a being for the rope. You can only put a load on the line and watch which end holds. I shook his hand the human way, which I'd taught him, and I took my rig out across the Black Bay in the rain, alone the way I liked it. And behind me, the academy that had failed me kept making officers the new way, the right way, the way a washed-out human diver had cost them a clean win to teach them. I never did become an officer. I want to end on that, because it's the true thing, and the true thing is the only thing worth ending on. They didn't make me one. The rule stood and I failed, and that was right. But 60 years of the finest beings in the galaxy had gone through that machine to be made into officers, and not one of them had taught it a thing. And a broken old diver who washed boats for a living went through it once, failed it, and taught it everything it had been getting wrong since before I was born. The chair was never the prize. The chair is the place you sit to be the last one off the ship. I'd known that since I was a green diver who surfaced without a man. It only took the galaxy's cruelest selection 60 years to find out the same thing, and a washed-out human to make it look.